Everybody, and thank you for joining me this evening. And I am here to talk about A Specter of Truth, which was my fifth book, actually. So some of you have read A Specter of Truth, I know. It is set in Kimberton, and it was I'm going to tell you how it got started, what creative juices started flowing. But basically it's a young girl, a young farm girl from Yellow Springs, Lizzie Mitchell, who liked teaching, but girls couldn't be teachers back in 1812, when my story was beginning. So the story is about the challenges she faced to realize her dream of being a teacher, and how it was like to live as a farm girl in rural Pikeland. A little bit about me. I started teaching in 1970. When I would tell that to my college students, they weren't even born yet, and really, so that was a long time ago. I started teaching first grade. And then through the years as I was teaching, I was also studying for my master's and my doctorate in nutrition science, and went through teaching high school and then into college, and then I became vice president for academic affairs at 3 different colleges. I returned to teaching after 12 years in administration at Marywood University up in Scranton. You know Marywood?
Yes.
And then, and I was the chair of the department overseeing the accreditation of the nutrition programs. If you've read any of my stories, you know that it always includes food. I really hadn't noticed that until friends of mine would say, you know, every one of them has food in it. So that was, it's probably due to the nutrition background. So it wasn't until I retired from Marywood that I finally had time to sit down and start what was a dream of mine, and that was to one day write a novel. I used to say that from the time I was a little girl. Someday I'm going to write a novel. Well, it was a long time in coming. How could I do it with all those accreditation reports and all the school grading papers and all of that? So it waited until 2011. And even then, I had put it aside. My dad had a stroke, got sick, all that goes on, you know, in life. And I one time said to a friend of mine, maybe around 2014, you know, I wrote a novel. She said, you did? Where is it? I said, oh, I don't even know. Well, I went looking for it. It was in a notebook, all handwritten, a whole notebook filled with this story. And she said, oh, you're going to just let it sit in that drawer? You need to, you know, get this out there. So I typed it up, and then I let her read it. And she said, oh, I loved it. Well, that book was, my first book was called Pustinia. And Pustinia novel, and I'll tell you why. Anybody know what a Pustinia is? A little cabin in the woods, often on the grounds of a monastery, used for retreats. And one time, a long time ago, I had gone to a cabin like this, and so I was drinking my tea one day saying, oh, what should I do when I retire? I wish I had one of those Pustinias. And I sat down and started writing this story. It's not a religious story. It's a story, actually people tell me it's a Hallmark feel-good story. And it's a story about a woman thinking about what shall I do in retirement. But the people she meets, the nuns that have the monastery. So after I finished that, one of my muses, I call people who tell me what I should do next, my muses, and one of my muses said, well, you can't just have an ebook. Some people don't read an ebook. You need to make a paperback. I said, how am I going to do a paperback? I don't know how to write a paperback. Well, she said, you're no dummy, figure it out. So I did a paperback. And at the time, I was designing my own covers. I realized, really, if you're going to play with the big guys, you've got to have a cover designer and all that. So my friends then said, well, you can't tell us, we want to know more about these characters. We love these characters. So I wrote book 2 of the Pustinia series. And book 2 focuses on the mansion that had been bequeathed to the nuns that ran that monastery. And I had once taught at St. Aloysius Academy in Bryn Mawr, which was in the Drexel Mansion, the old Drexel Mansion on Bryn Mawr Avenue. Anybody familiar with that place? And because it was in a mansion, that made sense. This could be a mansion that the main character of Pustinia helps the nuns create a B&B. Pretty cool. Get the nuns some income, And then everybody liked that one so much that I had to finish the series with Bountiful Legacies, which was about the couple who bequeathed the mansion to the nuns, and the historic, I love history, and I love mystery. So a little bit about the history of the people who bequeathed, and it goes back to Prohibition, goes back to the influenza of 1918, things like that. So that's the end of the nuns. But everybody likes the series. And then of course I had to write about my dog Pete. And those of you who know me on Facebook know that I have a follow-up, Maggie, who is nothing like Pete. And she is a character, but there's probably going to be a book about Maggie. And then Specter. But I want to, this is my last book. This is the book I'm going to give away today. Has anybody read this book yet? No Gifts to Bring? Well, No Gifts to Bring is totally different from Specter. It's set in the present. It is set with a lot of memories that I had from Scranton. And it's set at Christmas time. But everybody loved the main character so much that I decided that I would do a sequel, and that's going to be Murder in Aspen Notch, which some of you were here when we were talking about that. But I can't put out a new book if you haven't read No Gifts to Bring. So I'm going to give away a copy of this, and I think Leslie is still passing out the papers to sign up to win that. So, how to get to Specter, all right? Enough about me. I was sitting in the post office at Kimberton, and if you look at, that is the current post office at Kimberton. Everybody knows Kimberton, right? Yeah. And I'm sitting in the parking lot facing this building. And I'm going, wow, that's cool. I wonder what that was. And it's called Kimber House now, and I thought, that's a really old building. And I looked to my right, on the other side of the street, which these are current photos, that I think is some kind of art dealership now, maybe. And to the right, Kimberton Inn. That's Hares Hill Road in the center there. And this building didn't look as old to me, but Kimberton Inn says 1796 on the sign outside. So I'm thinking, I wonder what these were. This is really cool. So I went home and I Googled it. What are these 4 buildings? And found some really interesting information. All right. I also found this picture, the painting by John Pierce. It hangs in the Kimberton Inn, I understand. And I thought, wow, this is really cool. I'd like to write a story, a novel set at this time period. Now, everybody would have said, why not write about the Revolutionary War, George Washington and his troops were all traipsing through, down 113 into the Valley Forge. And I thought, no, people who are Revolutionary War buffs, they know their history much better than I do, right? So I'm not going to risk writing about the Revolutionary War time. But when I read that this building over here was owned by Emmer Kimber, and he converted it, or in addition to his family, he set up the French Creek boarding school for girls. I thought, boy, I taught at a boarding school. I could write about boarding schools, kids going to boarding school. So I thought, that is really cool. And this could be the perfect time frame I could actually picture. A story set in 1818 when that school began, and I can't get close enough for this. How does this pointer work?
It doesn't on that screen.
Oh. But over here, Mark, follow me here. Over here, you see, this is a mill race that actually went down what is now Kimberton Road, right? And it crossed under Hares Hill Road. And you see here I go again, Mark. Here. I was a teacher, Here, over here, you can see there was a culvert under that road into what was the grist mill, right? If you sit in the parking lot, you can see that culvert. The mill race is gone, but you can see the stones from that. They're all weed covered and all that. But pull into that one of those first parking spots at the post office in Kimberton, and you can see where the culvert was, but the mill race is not there any longer.
Is the school in that picture?
So was that Kimber Hall right there?
Yes.
The stone?
This big one. This is Kimber Hall. This was the Old Bear Tavern. This was a tenement that Chrisman had, who owned this corner before Kimber bought it, and Chrisman's mill was there. So it was a whole business that Chrisman had.
Which buildings survive today?
All of them. All of them are there today.
That stone building is what today?
This
The
one
one
here?
on the left side? Yes.
That is the Kimberton Post Office now.
Oh, I beg your pardon. Okay,
Yeah.
you did say that. All right. Oh, wow, great.
So everything, this is now the Kimberton Inn.
Oh, thank you.
This is now what is that art dealership.
Oh, I see.
And this is, now I'm going to come back to those pictures in 1 second because I want to show you just some key points here. So Emmer Kimber in about 1817 bought 200 acres of land. Emmer Kimber was a Quaker who taught at the Westtown Quaker School. And he wanted to open a school for girls. Now 1818, there were no schools for girls in 1818. Only the Quakers or specific religious denominations would think to include girls for a school. So he was very progressive, and he then, because he bought those 200 acres, he also got all the buildings. He bought Chrisman's properties, all right? So Chrisman's mill, George Chrisman, that mill where the post office is right now, that ran continuously till 1938. Is that not amazing? A couple hundred years that grist mill. Now, I didn't even know what a grist mill was. I mean, like we don't grind or grain. So I thought that was so cool that, the farmers now would bring their grain to the grist mill and bake it into flour, or cornmeal, depending on what kind of grain they had. And there were grist mills everywhere around here because of all the creeks. It was easy to dam up, make a mill stream to have running water. And in fact, where I set my story in Chester Springs, which was at that time Yellow Springs, there's a mill right down the street from exactly where I'm positioning it. But see, I read that Kimber had the lowest toll rates, that's what they called the cost to grind the grain. That he had the lowest toll rates of anybody around here. So it would make sense then that people would take their grain. That's my imagination, that's not true. I mean, whether it is or not, I don't know, that's my imagination, okay? But it makes sense that it could work in the story. And the sign of the Bear Tavern, that was, the old Bear Tavern, built in 1768. It was a stagecoach stop, and I incorporated that into my story. Those of you who have read it know that was a part of the story. That stagecoach would come through the Revolutionary times, from Philadelphia to Yellow Springs, where the Revolutionary War soldiers were. Kimber converted it to a general store, and around 1820, he called the little village Kimberton. How about that? You can call it your own name, and made a post office. So that yellow, we'll go back to the pictures again. I just wanted you to see these. And then the Kimberton Inn, that was originally a tenant house for Chrisman's employees. Kimber converted it to be an inn for the parents of the girls that went to school there. So if I go back, so here we have the old Bear Tavern, that became the general store and post office. The inn for the boarding school girls' parents, the grist mill, and the boarding school. Is that not cool? Mm-hmm. And at one point, Kimber, who was very entrepreneurial, actually got some of his Quaker elders angry because he got himself in debt a few times, was even taken to debtor's court in Westchester. And so in my story I wrote how, some of the people, some of the ladies wagging their tails about, he thinks he knows everything, he's got his hand in everything. Well, apparently that's what happened. And I also, given the pictures here, and that this was a tavern, I figured that there could be rooms up there. So in my imagination, I even had Lizzie at one point living with, in a room up there with two other friends of hers, and that's how my imagination worked. Okay, so Mark, I'm going to sit down for a second, okay?
Sure.
All right, so when I was doing my original research, I didn't even know what did women wear, what did people wear at that time? And, how did they cook? My thing on food. So how did they cook? What did they do? Well, this picture I found pretty much is an idea of what Lizzie would have been wearing as a farm girl in those days. They're kind of dressy, but basically they had their chemise underneath that they even went to bed in, like a nightgown. And then everything else, it had bodice, and everything else they had a petticoat, and then a skirt that tied. Imagine, ladies. I mean, I can't even imagine. And the petticoat was really important, because that showed, and they could, fancy it up a little bit. Not too much, that ostentation did not go far. But you can see, even in this picture, and sometimes they would even get gingham, colored gingham, to make a fancy petticoat.
Now, would these be Quaker women?
No, they would be a little plainer, but they would have their petticoat, the same thing. No, they wouldn't have their dress like that. But, and their dress would either be black or maybe like a very dark, plain color. And they probably wouldn't have buttons and all that, But Lizzie was not Quaker in my story. Lizzie was Presbyterian. And that was just because I didn't know enough about Quakers quite honestly, to think, like, if a Quaker read the story and said, oh, honey, you don't know what you're talking about. So I thought, I'm not gonna have Lizzie a Quaker. The Quakers did even allow students of, you know, any religious background to go to the school. They were very progressive. All right, I didn't know how you cooked. I mean, we've all seen pictures or gone to, like, Valley Forge and seen, you know, these gigantic hearths and all that. But I started trying to picture myself standing in the kitchen cooking. And what would I make? And how would this be? Because I have to write about food in my book. So how would Lizzie and her mother prepare food? And what was interesting to me is, like, even parts of this, I didn't know what a crane was. You guys probably think I'm like really nuts now. I didn't know this was a crane. Usually one on each side, oftentimes, and of course it could be moved back and forth to get the kettle closer to the fire or more away from the fire. And then you'd have warmers and you'd have ovens to bake, you know, and you'd be able to fry and all of that stuff. And the kind of food was the stuff that we have now. Like at a barbecue, things that you cook out with. Baked beans were very common. You know, meats, big pig roasts were very common. They would have a big, you know, all the families of the farmers in the area would come along. And like spices. You know, would they even make coffee or tea? Well, interestingly, this is 1818. Coffee was still the beverage of choice because my sister read the book first. She's always one of my beta readers. She read the book and she said, why are they always drinking coffee? Why wouldn't they be drinking tea? And I had done research on that. There was still a sentiment against tea from the Revolutionary War. So coffee, you could buy coffee beans and grind them yourself. You know, you'd go to the general store and you could buy a pound of, you know, probably whatever, half a pound of coffee beans and grind them. So that was kind of interesting to see how, but imagine, I mean, ladies, those skirts leaning into the fire, you know, can you imagine? And lugging the kettles from the backyard, you know, the well where you're pumping the water and then carrying them all the way through. Like, to me, it was just amazing how all of that started to become a part of it. So I did a lot of research online and the Historical Society, but the Phoenixville Historical Society didn't have a lot, but the East Pipeline did. Well, they have a room, and their website has a lot of information, so I could get a lot of research that way. But one of the coolest things, down here you see I have 30,000 Acres. This is a book by Estelle Kremers. And when I went to East Pipeline, the township building, to see what I could find out, they showed me this book and they said, now this book is out of print right now, so you can come here and read it, but you can't take it with you. And I said, Estelle Kremers, that name is familiar, is she still alive? And the lady said, no, I don't think so. Anybody here know Estelle Kremers? Right, well, guess what? My sister's close friend was Hope Kremers and her daughter Eve Kremers, who was still to this day friends of my niece Kim. And so I said, Kim, ask Eve if Estelle Kremers is related to her. It's her grandmother. Her grandmother. So I called to see if they happened to have that book in their basement, and they did. So I have a copy of 30,000 Acres. It has so much. Mark, you'll have to check and see if it's in the library here.
It is. It's in our local history collection.
It's an excellent resource for the history of this whole area with, you know, Vincent Township and you know, the whole area. It's really cool. So that was a great deal of research just for this for this book. And then I found this map. Now this map doesn't mean anything, you can't see it, but what's really cool, going across here is Conestoga Pike, which is 401, everybody know? This road down the center, which is 113. Everybody knows 113, right? Now, I tried to see what was 113 called back in the day of 1818, and the closest I could find was the road to Euclid. This Euclid is around Route 100, 113 and 100. So I thought that was cool. This picture is probably a few years after mine because the Pickering Valley Railroad was going through there, and that had not started up in 1818 yet. But all of these are the names of the farmers and the plot of land. So I wrote in as Lizzie is, going with her brother through the farmland to get to the grist mill, I could name, there's Mr. Emery, and that's the Emery farm. And you know what's really cool? The farm market out on 113, the Jaegers, they're on the map.
Wow.
Back
Yeah,
back in the early 1800s. And in fact, was the East Pikeland map, which I couldn't find when I was getting ready for today. But the East, so you can see they actually, their farm crop was on both sides of 113. Nowadays, it looks like they're just on the right side, coming up to Kimberton. But I thought that was kind of cool. So I used that just to give me an idea of, who the people were. No genealogy. I'm not referencing people and their families and all that. I'm just using surnames that I saw on the map. And so, a couple little things at the end as I was, coming up with a design and a title for the book. I had Lizzie eventually have a buggy so she could go back and forth to her family's farm in Yellow Springs. And those buggies, now I don't know if I say this right, but I call it a phaeton. Anybody know better? I'm not sure. But I think it's a phaeton, which is a buggy. And I came across this picture, can you see it well enough in the back, of a buggy. To me, this reminds me of like what 113 might have been like, as she's going along there in the woods and everything. And I think it's actually an Amish buggy, but I'm pretending it's a phaeton. All right. So I also love to write some things about, mystery in my stories, and so I created the uncle. Those of you who've read the book, you do not like the uncle, right? The uncle is, well, we don't know. Is he who he says he is, what's true and what's not? So to me, that was like ethereal, like a specter of truth. That's where I got the title from, the specter of truth. But it was very important to me that it was not a specter of accuracy. I wanted historical accuracy. And so I did so much research about every single thing. And at the end of the book, I even say what's real and what's not real. What is fiction, what's not fiction. There were a couple things that people were really surprised about. I had Pa stepped on a steel trap, a rusty steel trap, and Pa got tetanus. Now in 1818, they didn't know what caused tetanus, but every person who contracted it died. Nobody survived tetanus. And back around that time, a young doctor who studied at Columbia College, it was at the time, only men were allowed, by the way, in New York, had a patient who developed tetanus, and he put him in hot water baths, 24 hours a day, weeks at a time. I mean, like, basically, constantly, now, think back to the hearth. They're lugging in the water from outside, heating it up to boiling, getting it in the tub, and refilling it constantly with hot water. And the person survived. Now they know that tetanus is a toxin. A toxin is a protein. Proteins nutrition's coming in here. Proteins denatured with heat. So it killed the toxin, which is how the patient survived. You know, isn't that interesting?
Mm-hmm.
So that's part of, it's in the story. And I have to mention soda crackers because I was going to write in one of my characters going to the general store and getting soda crackers from the Cracker Barrel and for nausea during pregnancy. And I thought, I better look this up. No, baking soda was not discovered until 1830. There were no soda crackers at that time. They had what was called hardtack, which was their cracker. They did sell hardtack in the general store, or they'd make it at home because it traveled well. I think it was basically flour and water baked. It was hard. I always thought hardtack was candy. Did you think so too? I did too. But they would call it hardtack, and they carried it in saddlebags for long trips, and it kept well, I guess, because it had no leavening agent. And finally, I thought, I need somebody to fact check me. So I looked on the Historical Society, Phoenixville Historical Society website, and I found Susanna Brody. Has anybody ever gone to one of her talks? She has spoken at the Phoenixville Historical Society. And she gladly said she would read Specter of Truth, and she gave it thumbs up except for one thing. I had the children doing face painting for a festival of sorts as they were leaving to go home for their break, you know, like their summer break. We did that in the boarding school. You know, we'd have a little festival party and cookout, and they'd have face painting. And I thought, well, the Indians lived around here, and they painted their faces, and they had art classes at the French Creek boarding school for girls. They would have played around with paint. And Susanna said, it was a Quaker school. Ha ha, you know. So that came out of it. They didn't do face painting at the festival. The festival didn't come out just that. And so, I'm going to open it up to questions, but I just want to say thank you. Thank you to those of you who have read my books. The readers have been so supportive of me. I am so grateful. You know, and quite honestly, so many of them have left feedback for me on Amazon or Goodreads. That means so much to me. In fact, it's that feedback that Rob Cadigan said he would sell my books at Reads & Company. So I was, you know, if you haven't ever given feedback, it's so easy to do. You just scroll down and, you know, we all buy things from places that you can find feedback, right? And don't you read the feedback before you buy something? The same way with books. So if you like the story, just take the minute to, you just scroll down to the feedback, and then there's a button that says, would you like to leave feedback? And you go, click, and that's it. I mean, it's so easy to do. So it's my readers that are keeping me writing. To see my name in lights. I was driving along through 23 and I'm going like, oh my God. And it was so cool. I waited till it scrolled all the way through until I could get another picture of it. And so Gateway Pharmacy was the first place in town that offered my books. Now Reading the Company, the Y, some of you I met at the Y, they invited me to come and speak to the book club at the Y, and then back for one of the functions, the health fair in May. Mark Pinto for calling me and saying, would you come and speak to our group? I was honored, so thank you, Mark. And I have to say thank you to the people who have been my muses, who egg me on, give me ideas for the next story, or tell me, you know, I want you to follow up on this one. We need more stuff on this, more books on this area. My editors, the ones who find those pesky typos, and you know, I was reading it today and I found one more typo in there. It's not even one that anybody would recognize, I don't think, but I saw it. And then to the ladies of French Creek, and I have a couple here who are, have been so supportive. We have a little sewing group, and they are constantly telling me, like, oh, you know what, this is how you could market your books, this is what you could do. So they egg me on, and all of those, and all of you for showing up tonight. I mean, wouldn't that have been awful if I got here and nobody was here? Oh my gosh, I had dreams of it last night. So, thank you all. Now, I will open up the questions.
Kathleen, can you read a little before you do questions?
The reading. You know, I always tell people, I shouldn't say this, readings are so boring. So boring. All right, but I will try, and I hope I don't get nervous. I do. All right, this is a passage that I think will bring to light some of the things that we talked about, especially with that map kind of thing, as they're going, and the farm from Yellow Springs, it was called then, to Kimberton. So this is the beginning of chapter 3. I promise you. You know, raise your hand when you start to fall asleep. Go. Yeah. All right. So the main character is Lizzie Mitchell. She's 16, and she has a bunch of brothers and sisters. The one closest in age is Will, and he's old enough now to drive the wagon to take the grain to the grist mill, going all the way from Yellow Springs down through the farm roads to Kimberton. All right. Will wasn't much for talking as he directed Nellie down the hill from our house to the road. He gets a funny furrow in his brow when he's concentrating on anything important. Sure enough, he knows Pa would be really upset if anything happened to the wagon or our hard-earned cargo, not to mention Nellie. She's our best working horse, pulling the plow or the wagon, even the sleigh in winter. Once we go down the steep incline, Will relaxed a bit, but there are plenty more around here. We've got hills all over Pipeline, hills and creeks. Good thing most of the better roads have a crossing over the streams nowadays, though some folks will so often just ford them at the shallowest spot if they're looking to get someplace faster. Will seems content to stay on the main roads. We passed by Emery's farmhouse, picture the map, and I waved to Mrs. Emery hanging wash on the line. Like us, Jacob and their boys plant corn, wheat, and soybeans, though they have a few more cows and pigs than we do. They must do pretty good because their house and barn are bigger than ours. Can't say we're doing poorly though. Pa says we're lucky we got a roof over our heads and food in our bellies. He was smart to also put sheep on our land because Ma and now Ellie, that's her sister, spin enough wool to provide for our needs and barter their wet rest. Don't be calling attention to everyone when we pass by their homesteads, Will said. They'll be wanting us to stop and talk, and we ain't got time today. You don't want to be sociable? Don't know why you're in such a hurry. You don't even like farming, and that's what you'll be doing as soon as we get home. I'll be plenty amiable when we get to the crossroads. I figure I'll be talking to the folks waiting for our flour. Besides, there's a lot going on with the blacksmith and tannery right there on the premises. I sure would like to apprentice with one of them tradesmen. Mark my words, one of these days I'll find me an opportunity to be a businessman and get rich. I'm not going to spend my life breaking my back, fighting with Mother Nature to eke out a living. What's Pa got to say about that? I asked, as Will made a turn that led us through the deeply wooded Phillips land. The road is barely a wide enough path with tree limbs that reach across above our heads to form an intertwining green canopy, leaves only rustling as the birds return to feed their young. Smaller branches brushed the wagon as we slowly made our way up the one curvy hill and down the next. He wouldn't hear none of it, said I was talking crazy like his brothers used to do. Don't think any of them got wealthy, leastways not as much as we know. Might be, might not. Maybe I'm smarter than they were. Will looked sideways at me with a grin for good measure. What about you, he asked. Doesn't seem to me like you're planning to be a farm wife. That is, if you ever had any callers except maybe Pimply Henry Harris. I'd have laughed if I hadn't felt a cringe of disgust at the thought of chicken-chested, stringy-haired Henry taking a liking to me. He never called on me, and you know it. He asks for you every time his ma sends him over to barter for butter or wool. That doesn't count. He's just being neighborly. I'll find me a man who's strong and masculine, but gentle as a lamb. One who'll treat me as an equal partner in marriage. Will laughed out loud as he maneuvered Nellie around the fallen bridge. Sounds like one of them fairy tales that Ma tells the young'uns. You'll be a spinster for sure if you're waiting around for some figment of your imagination. Specter of truth. Kind of like them, the ghosts in these woods. William Mitchell, you sure know how to get my dander up. Now you're trying to scare me. What ghost are you talking about? Just listen, Will said, almost in a whisper. If you listen real careful, you can hear crying way off in the distance. I couldn't hear much except the clip-clop of Nellie's hooves making their way over the packed trail. Still, I tried to focus my ears to pick up sounds deep in the woods. Will seemed to enjoy my sudden silence. Legend has it, he continued, one of the early white settlers built a cabin on Pickering Creek. I'm talking about a time even before William Penn took ownership of this land. Mostly Indians lived around here. Anyway, he had a wife and a passel of kids, but I don't know how many exactly. He lived peacefully among the Lenape, fishing and hunting, trading pelts for his livelihood. Then one day, a different tribe tried to take over this whole area, killed the settler and his boys, and took the wife and girls as their bounty. If you listen good, you can hear them girls crying. I looked intently at Will, trying to see if he was teasing me as he often does. He was staring straight ahead, serious as all get out. Suddenly I heard the sound, soft as a whisper at first, building almost to a low keening. It's animals, I said, trying to reassure myself. Probably foxes or coyotes. Might be, might not. Just telling you what Pa told me. And he knows because Pappy told him. What can I answer? Any questions? Yes.
Do you live in Kimberton or Chester Springs?
I live in Kimberton.
Oh, you did?
Technically Phoenixville, actually.
Okay.
I live like at the Villas of French Creek,
Okay.
which is right behind Ace Hardware. Yes.
Yes, did you publish the book yourself or find
Yes.
the book? You did?
I did. You know what? Because I was not looking for a second career, and this was, for me, it was fun, you know, just writing and telling stories. I was having fun with it. And I'm 70 years old. I decided that I'm not going to be looking for an agent and a publisher, and I don't expect to ever be on, you know, James Patterson's list and all that kind of stuff. You know, even when I read like Lisa Scottolini's agenda, and one day she's in, you know, when she goes on these book tours, and one day she's in Arizona, and the next day she's up in Chicago someplace, and the next, I'm thinking, like, no, I don't want that. I'm just happy to write, and then I love meeting and greeting. So, you know, of course, if you want to buy the books, that's nice too. I don't have any problem with that. But and to spread the word. I mean, it's exciting to me to see. You know, I can see when my books sell. It's exciting. Now, you know, I'm happy with one a day. So I'm not talking about like big numbers. I'm talking like, wow, I sold another book today. It's exciting, you know. And like I said, if people didn't tell me they enjoyed the stories, I wouldn't do this, but it's fun.
Well, how do you know how many books to put out at a clip so you're not left with a lot of books?
Because as an independent writer, I've actually chosen to go through Amazon, and they print on demand.
Oh, okay.
So I do order my books. I have to, if I want any, I buy them. I do get a discount, which I'm able to pass on like a little bit. It's not a big discount, but I get a little discount. I buy them, I pay the postage, shipping and handling. And then, so I keep some on hand for events like this that I can bring some over. But other than that, it's basically, so if you went on Amazon and looked at and ordered a book, which you can get an ebook or paperback now, then it would come directly to you. But since you live in my neighborhood, I have some in my garage. There you go. Any other questions?
How long did it take you to write A Specter of Truth? With all the research you had to do and
It took about a year. It took about a year. I actually had just had spinal surgery in January of 2016. And, I'm trying to think. I published Specter in like September of 2017. So I couldn't go anywhere or do anything except I could sit at the computer. So
Right.
it was kind of, so a lot of the research I did was right on the computer, except for short trips like to the county building and things like that. It takes about a year though.
And in your research, what's like the one thing that's really stuck with you that you had never known before you did your research?
That's a
Or a
great
couple of things.
question. That is a great question. Well, I highlighted the things that I really didn't know, like how they dressed, how they cooked, how they did things like that. But I think what was interesting is that even though the time period was 200 years ago, people were very similar in this area. You know, people in this, we have a lot of strongly religious-based groups in this area. That was a very prevalent thing. The Quakers, very interesting things that was kind of a surprise to me, that what I was reading, I could picture myself then, even though it was 200 years ago. As far as, like, there was so much I didn't know about the history that, you know, I had to be really careful and research there was so much I didn't know. You can visit the place, but you don't know the details, kind of thing. Did I answer that question?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
I don't know if you're familiar with this, but in the clubhouse, there's a newspaper clipping on the bulletin board in the entryway. It's about the development of the site that the villas were built on, Maple Lawn Farm.
Yes,
Have you read that?
No, I actually didn't read it, but
Yeah.
I've missed seeing that, but
I
yeah, there's
bet a
so
lot
much
of people that
history.
live there have not read it, but I'm kind of nerdy that way,
You-
and I need to
you
read
like
everything, and I really found it fascinating, because it was only 1990 that the whole area was developed. That was part of where Ace Hardware and Gennardi's
Right.
used to be. That was all part of the farm.
It's a horse farm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I used to buy and sell horses.
Yeah.
You know, when I would come down to visit my parents from Scranton, I always came the back road and down 100 from Allentown, and then, you know, 724, and I passed by those villas, you know, probably 20 years, the time that it's been in existence, never knew anything was back there. And here I am living here now. It's really,
Is that how old they are, 20 years?
yeah, 20 years now.
There was an auction house,
Yeah.
when a horse
Was there?
Maple
Is it-
Lawn.
There's
Oh, actually, I
Saturday
did Maple
morning.
Lawn, yeah, yeah.
Well, that's your assignment, you must read that newspaper.
I will, yeah, yes.
You said you were at Marywood, and what were the other two universities you were?
I was at Immaculata University, and I was at Newman University, and as vice president for academic affairs at Immaculata University, and then I went to Newman University down in Aston, and then I went to Brushy University in Owensboro, Kentucky. Anybody know Owensboro, Kentucky? Really cool. It was right on the Ohio River. was really neat. And then, and I really wasn't thinking about coming back yet, but I saw a position in nutrition at Marywood, and Marywood was a sister school for Immaculata, so, you know, so I wanted to, so I applied there and I got the position, so I left Kentucky then. That was in 2004. So it was kind of interesting, and a lot of people say like, so I'm gonna tell you right up front, I was a nun, okay?
Really?
Yes, it is okay.
You knew that?
What,
Did you
from-
figure it out?
From Mac, are you a Mac?
I was, yeah. And so I was the vice
Well,
president.
how did you
of
go
that.
to Marywood, because that's the Macs also, but they're not you.
Right, but see, when I left the convent,
Oh,
when I was at Immaculata, and then I went to Newman,
Got it, okay.
and then I went out to Kentucky. And that's why, when I saw an advertisement for Marywood,
Right.
man, my heart was like, I need to apply for that. And
Our
I
hearts are
was,
behind Sweet Marywood.
And where is Marywood?
It's in Scranton, Pennsylvania, yeah. So it really was, I mean, and that's what, you know, like, don't get me wrong, Pustinia has a lot of nuns in it, but it's not a religious book. But no, like, I know Nundom, I know about nuns, so I can tell you the truth, you know?
Like that
Oh,
one.
yeah, yes.
When you were at St. Aloysius in Bryn Mawr, did you know Sister Maria Louise by any chance?
Yes, I did know
Oh, wow.
Sister Maria.
She was our teacher and principal over at St. Mary's on the north side
Really?
back in the 70s.
Actually, I think I lived with Sister Maria Louise at some place. I don't think it was St. Aloysius, though. I did live with her at some point. But see, when I say I know even the mansion, I lived in that mansion. And there was that old bowling alley in the basement of it. So I could write all these things about what it must be like to live in an old mansion. Like, I had lots of experiences.
How long were you a sister?
29 years,
Wow.
yeah.
Is it a once a sister, always a sister there?
It's in there, it's in
Yeah,
there.
you have that Tuesday about you, there's something about you. Seriously. Yeah.
I know, it is, it's still a part of me, it really is, yes.
Well, for St. Aloysius Academy, was that because there had already been Villa Maria, and some of the families wanted to for the boys?
Probably way back in the 50s,
Or even earlier.
maybe, yeah.
Well, what did,
They bought St. Aloysius, I mean, Villa Maria and St. Aloysius were in existence from the very beginning. They were out in Westchester. And then they bought Green Tree, the nuns bought Green Tree in
right,
Malvern.
yeah, Keno.
And they bought the Drexel estate.
Got it, okay.
It was up for auction. They probably got a good price, you know.
I think
But it
so.
was back in like 1950,
Right.
and they made that into a boarding school. So I taught in that boarding school. Then we had day students too, but, you know, I was one of those strict nuns that made the boys get up at too early, et cetera.